Hi, and welcome to Cellular Reset. Oftentimes we look at a lot of spiritual practices and we think that it's kind of foo-foo, right? But really, a lot of the spiritual practices that have been around for thousands of years are actually rooted in science. And when we look at quantum physics, we actually see that our mind actually influences reality. And this has been proven time and time again. And my next guest on the Cellular Reset is Rhonda Byrne, and she wrote a book called The Secret that wound up becoming a major Hollywood blockbuster movie. I watched it when it first came out in the theaters, and I've been privileged to make Rhonda a friend, and she is my next guest, and you are going to really enjoy this next interview. For those listening to this, this is Rhonda Byrne, and she wrote a very popular book that became a movie called The Secret. And in essence, it's about the law of attraction. And so Rhonda and I met, what was it, last year you came out to Florida, and we had a chance to go boating together, and we had this beautiful lunch, and we just had such amazing time together and such interesting conversation. You shared with me a little bit about how this book came to fruition, which I'd love to maybe, kind of get a short synopsis of that because it's just so fascinating.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm in the middle of doing this summit, this virus summit, right? And so we're in the middle of this coronavirus epidemic where a lot of people are quarantined, and we're in a place where the immune system needs to be of the utmost importance. And there's a lot of things going on right now where I think this work that you do is very critical to get out there. And so with that said, I'd love to just hear, just kind of a brief synopsis of how did you get involved with this work and what inspired you to write the book, The Secret?
Right. Well, I was much like everybody else, and I only believed, what I could see. And so the world was very concrete and very matter of fact, and, bad things could happen to good people, and bad things could happen at any time. So I think there are just many, many people who believe that. And then I had this really, really rough year. And my father, who was not old at all, he was young, he died really suddenly. And my mother and father had just the best love affair I've ever seen. They loved each other from the day they met. And so it was a devastating situation for my mother and heartbreaking. But that was the beginning of 2004. And my father died in March, and I was making 6 movies. I had a production company, and I was making 6 movies for a network in Australia. And can you believe those movies were about murder? Like, that would be unsolved murders. So that would be about the worst thing you could do when you're going through grief.
Yeah.
Well, that year was just everything that could possibly go wrong went wrong that year. And especially with the work that we were doing, and I ended up sleeping in edit suites, hardly getting any sleep. I lost staff, which was something that never happened. It was just so challenging, the whole year. And I reached a point, I was really unwell. My relationships were in shreds because I hadn't maintained any of them. And I reached this point on this particular evening in September, and where my accountant called me and said that we had run over budget by $2 million, and I still had one and a half of these movies to finish. And he said, you will be broke in 30 days, and you will lose everything.
Mm.
And so I hung up from that phone, and I was in shock, just completely frozen. And terrified. And next thing, the phone rang again, and it was my mother, except I didn't even recognize her voice. And she was in such a terrible way, and saying she couldn't go on. She couldn't go on without my father. And and it's interesting because my mother was always just so strong. My parents, they never ever leaned on us ever. But here she was calling me, which meant she was incredibly desperate. And so I talked to her. By this stage, it was like 10:30 at night, and I talked to her, told her that I would go and see her. She was a few hours away, and I would go and see her in the morning, and that everything will be okay. And I hung up the phone, and I had this balcony of this apartment that I was in, and I went out and sat on the balcony, and honestly, it was in utter despair. My whole life, I'd fixed everything. Every problem, I'd been able to fix it. I'd been able to resolve it. But these two things were so enormous, I couldn't resolve either one of them. And so right then, my daughter walked out and saw me. And I was just trying to pull myself together a bit, but not successfully. And she asked me what was wrong, and I just said a whole lot of things. And she disappeared, and then she came back with this photocopied pages with a bulldog clip attached, all sort of crumpled up. And she handed it to me, and she said, "Read this, it will help." And it was so weird because she would never say anything like that to me. And what was even weirder was that I took it, I stepped inside. I could only even walk 3 steps to the sofa, and I sat on the sofa, and I sat there to read it. Can you believe I would actually even read it?
Yeah.
And I just saw all of these tears were falling on the pages and making the ink run. I remember that. An hour and a half later, I finished those pages, and my whole life had changed. And that, what I read, was called The Science of Getting Rich, was written in 1910 by Wallace Wattles. We have it on our website for free if anybody wants to download it. It has, that kind of language to it from its time. And so when I read that book, I knew much more than was in that book. And lots of people have read it since, and they're like, how did you ever discover the secret from that? Well, it was really just the beginning, but I knew when I read that book, nothing was what it appears to be. Nothing. My whole world of concrete and everything just collapsed. And so I then started on a massive, and I was an incredible researcher. I started on massive research, and basically what I did was I took Wallace Wattles and I read everything he had. Then I looked for his mentor. Then I read everything his mentor had. Then I looked for that person's mentor, and I read everything they had written, and I looked for their mentor. And that's how I went back into time. And I went back, in the end, I would leap through time, and I went back, can you believe it, to the Emerald Tablet. So, which was, thousands of years BC. So
Wow.
I went through traditions and religions and everything. And what was so incredible to me was that everywhere I looked, there it was. There it was. But you would never find it or see it if you didn't know what you're looking for. And so I didn't say a word to anybody at all. I just kept doing all of this research. And then in January 2005, I walked into my company. What I ended up by doing, by the way, was going to my accountant, and I said to him, I finished the 1.5 films. I went to my accountant and I said, I don't know what you need to do, but what you need to do is you need to keep my company alive, because I'm going to make something that's going to change the world. And I need to focus on what I'm doing, and you focus on the money part of it. And I walked into my team and I said, we're going to make something that is absolutely incredible, and we're going to bring joy to the world. And because I looked around and I'm like, no one knows this. No one knows the power. Well, not many people know the power of their mind, to create their entire life through a thought. So so then we so then we began, and in the following year of March 2006, The Secret documentary was released, and in November 2006 I wrote the book. And since then I've written quite a few books, but since then I never stopped, I never stopped searching. And searching for more of the truth and to know more, and I've continued doing that to this day. And but I have lived The Secret from the day that I discovered it. So we made the documentary film by using the Secret principles, and which we had just learned, so it was a scorching way to learn, because I kept running out of money, and so anyway, so that's basically how it happened.